So I was too tired yesterday, didn't do the video as promised on Sunday, but today's Monday, I'm not too far behind. And so we start this story with in 1979 when Captain Sergei was 17 years old. I had all my hair, all my teeth. I was a handsome kid, even though I say so myself. But I was super shy. Girls paid me no attention. And the summer of 1979 was super important. I had some Sneaky Weasel, some craft lager beer. Who comes up with these names? Now we're just to something more interesting. Stella, easy. And so lots of choices in the summer. So I just finished school. High school, and what do? We had, of course, there was no question that. Actually, my late dad did not want me to go to a university. He says, "What? We're gonna feed him for another 5 years." Basically, Dad was not too keen on me staying in because we all lived, four of us, in one bedroom apartment. Or in Russia, they don't count bedrooms, they count rooms, right? So you have a sitting room and a bedroom. In Russian, they would say that's a 2-room apartment. So we lived in a 2-room apartment, 4 people, and my dad was kind of like desperate for me to leave because I was 17. I don't know. He was basically ready to kick me out. So he says, "Why do you have to go to institute? You're gonna waste 5 years and sit on our." Be kind of like, drain their resources. He said, "Why don't you go to a technical school?" And technical school, it was kind of like a 1 or usually a 2-year program. Basically, they train you to be a worker, right? Let's say, lathe, all these machines at the factory that, people use to manufacture something, right? So they train you to be a skilled worker. And so that's what he wanted me to be. He wanted me to go to a short program at a technical school so that I can start making money right away. So he saw me as a worker. My mom, on the other hand, because she worked at on the engineering in the engineering position, even though she only finished a 3-year school. Technicum, which is also like technical school but more advanced, right? So she was a technik stроитель in Russian. So basically she was supposed to be like, a clerk working somewhere in an office at a construction site, and she was doing, like I mentioned this before, she was doing estimates. So basically she was like a estimate clerk, accountant, bookkeeper, whatever. But because she was at that factory for so long in this town, they promoted her and they gave her a raise, and she was actually getting money as if she was an engineer, as if she finished 5-year program, school. But she was not an engineer, so she always wanted me to be an engineer. And I'm not mechanically inclined or anything like that. But she was okay with me continuing my education at a higher level. She didn't want me to go to a simple technical school and become a worker. But she wanted me to be an engineer, and we had 3 colleges or universities, or in Russian they were called institute. I'm not sure what the difference is between an institute and a university. It's the same 5-year program. All our higher level educational establishments, it was 5-year program. We never had like 3 or 4. 3 is if you go to what my mom went to, like a technical school. That's kind of like 1 level below the institute or university. So let's say if you want to be an accountant, or you want to be I don't know, like a construction technician, right? So you go to this technical 3-year program, technical school. But you don't get to be an engineer or architect or doctor, right? And so I wanted to be I wanted to learn English, but also I was interested in flying jets, because I grew up with all these stories my dad was telling me, right? Because he was a jet fighter pilot, and so we had three schools, or three colleges in our town. One was the Pedagogical Institute, Pedagogiczny Institute, basically, where they trained teachers. Again, 5-year program, and we had foreign languages department, and then we had I think history department. Basically, when you graduate, you become a teacher of history, and I think another one was Russian literature, where you become teacher of literature. But it was all 5-year programs, kind of like almost not a Bachelor of Arts in to translate into Canadian standards and American standards, but it was more like a MA, Master of Arts, right? And so one was this pedagogical thing, and I never wanted to be a teacher. My focus was to learn English, and I knew that I would never learn it by myself. I wanted to get into this just to learn English. I had no idea what I would be doing after, I was 17. But my dream was to learn English and to be able to speak it freely. But that was one school. The second school was because the biggest factory in our town, in that part of the country, it was Ukraine, right? But it was Ukrainian Socialist Republic back when the Soviet Union was still in place. It was just one of the republics making the USSR, right? And so it was all agricultural, right? There's fields everywhere, there's collective farms, right? We didn't have farmers, but it was all collective farms, basically state-owned. And because there was agriculture all around us, we had the biggest employer in town was called Krasnaya Zvezda, a red star, not surprisingly. And they were making combines and all kinds of agricultural machines. And because of this, the second school, or the second college I want to mention, was agricultural engineering and manufacturing. It was like Институт сельскохозяйственного машиностроения, basically agricultural manufacturing institute. So you go there, and they had different departments, but basically you end up being an engineer dealing with agricultural manufacturing. And that's why my mom was pushing me, and I had zero interest in that. First of all, I didn't want to be an engineer, and secondly, agriculture. I hated agriculture. My mom was always, we had a vegetable plot a few kilometers away from our, they gave, the place where you worked would give you a small plot of land where you can grow stuff for yourself only. But some people were still selling it, but you were not supposed to, right? Again, because there was no private, there was no businesses, right? There was no enterprise, stuff like that was not allowed, so you can only grow it for yourself. So my mom was always doing something there, planting, and I hated that, oh, Sergey, can you help me? We're gonna, get some weeds out. But she was in love with that because she grew up in a village, or поселок городского типа, like a small town. So of course she had the early exposure to all this, farming and stuff like that. So, but again, I had no interest in that. I was more of a city boy, right? So out of these three, and the third one was kind of like an aviation school, where they train you to be a pilot for civil aviation. And it was also a 5-year program, so you end up with a diploma as a pilot/engineer, which was pretty cool, because let's say if you retire or they ground you, like it with my father, right? Let's say you cannot fly anymore, but you're an engineer, so you can easily get a job somewhere and make good money. So these were pretty popular. So of course you don't have to be an engineer to be a pilot, right? It's just like that. I mentioned one of my passengers with Lyft was a young lady who flies a Boeing 777 here in Canada, and she said she only did 6 months in high school to get a private license, and then she did a 2-year program to become a commercial pilot. So you don't have to study for 5 years to be a pilot, but it's only because in our town they wanted you to be an engineer as well, right? So those were the three choices: either become an agricultural engineer, or civilian pilot, like commercial airlines airline pilot, or teacher of English. And actually, I remember that because I was so in love also with with the flying and army, and my dad was telling us all these stories, every night, like. And I was at his airfield. I sat inside that MiG-21. I read a ton of books about pilots, and I was really interested in the army. And so I remember I applied. I went to the local. It was called Военкомат, kind of like Военный комиссариат, military commission, which basically like a recruitment place, right, for the army. And I think I filled out that application. I said, yeah, I want to enter the military flying school. It was like a military college, right? And one of the first things you had to do was to do a medical. And I don't remember if I did it on the same day or I had to come back. But anyway, so the medical was done right there. There was, I think it was a certain day of the week. All the doctors would come to this recruitment place and recruitment office, and all the candidates, depending on which school they were going to, let's say somebody wants to go to artillery, military college, somebody wants to go to infantry, somebody wants to go to pilot, school. And you go through all these doctors, and that's when I find out at the age of 17 that from birth one of my eyes was 90% vision. And the doctor is, you cannot enter the school. He says the thing is, they allow 90% vision when you graduate, but to be accepted, you need to have 100% vision on both eyes. No glasses, must be basically, it was like as if you were applying for astronaut position. They were super strict. And same was about the railroad, where I later tried to get in as become a train engineer, and for the same reason, 90% vision in one eye, they rejected me. And so I applied, and they said no, because of your vision, they will not accept you. And so I still wanted to be in the army, and so I applied just basically for anything that was available there. I remember it was some kind of an infantry military college, so I would graduate as a lieutenant in the infantry. Probably would have been dead in Afghanistan a long time ago if they accepted me, but lucky or unlucky for me, I still remember this stuff. I think this bio helps. When they were doing the medical, they check everything, and they check your skin, your feet, see if you have any infections anywhere, right? And they found out there was some kind of a liquid between the toes on my foot, either left foot or right foot, so basically it was some kind of a bacteria. And back then, we all went to, every week, most people would go to public bath houses. It sounds very silly now, but you go there, there's men and there's women, and you're all naked. Everybody's naked. You don't know if there's any gay people around, having fun, but basically everybody's naked. You get your little container for water, and you soap yourself, and of course, if somebody has this stuff, right, this bacteria, then because you walk on the floor, on this concrete floor. So anyway, I got that, and the guy says, no, you have to fix it. They will not allow you to join the army with that bacteria on your foot. And I said, you know what, screw this. I was ready to go into the infantry school, and you would not even accept me for this. So basically, I lost desire to be a military man, and I returned to my original idea of enrolling into this pedagogical college. And of course, my dad didn't want me to go to any college period. And my mom said, "You crazy? That foreign languages department, it's only for rich kids, for privileged, you know." Even though we didn't have like rich and poor people, but we, the life in the Soviet Union was always revolving around material stuff, right? So if you know somebody who knows somebody who works, let's say, as a store manager or warehouse manager, those people were always like, they were covered in gold, you know, because they would receive some deficit in Russian, like some rare stuff, you know, I don't know, let's say some Armenian cognac from Armenia was in high regard, or I don't know, they would receive some Napoleon cognac from France. They will never put it on the shelf, you know, they would hide it, and just call their friends, you know, other, you know, rich people, like doctors, party members, you know, hey, you know, you want some Napoleon cognac? And of course they would not sell it for the regular price. They would, you know, get extra money for it. And so if you ended up as a manager of a retail store, you know, like anything, clothes, food, or a warehouse, because of course everybody was stealing, everybody was on the take. It was like 50% economy was on the ground, you know, I'm telling you. And so what my mom meant, she said that basically all these important people, you know, like store managers and factory factory directors, you know, like managers of factories and warehouses, they would want their kids to get that education. And she said, you know, we cannot give any bribes, you know, we don't have the money, so you will never pass, you know, such don't even try. But I was stubborn, I was set in my ways. I said, no, that's it, I'm applying, I'm gonna take the entrance. Yeah, and there were some entrance exams, like to get to the institute. You had to take the exams right at the institute, like you fill out the application and they're telling you, okay, this day you're gonna do this test, and then this test, and I think there were like 4 entrance exams. Of course, one was English, because I was applying to the English language department, and I think the other one was Russian literature, and then history, and something else, I forgot, but I remember it was 4. And basically they combine the marks you get, and you need to achieve like a passing, you know, point. Let's say, I don't know, let's say if it's 4 exams, 5, if you get, you know, highest mark was 5. If you get like 20 points, that's ideal. But I think I didn't do too good, but I was like in the middle. I think I had like 16 or 15 points, you know. One was 4 great, you know, mark was 4 out of 5, 4, and then maybe one was 3 and one was 5, I don't know. But that English language exam, man, that was something. That was the first time when we show up there, and of course my English was, I was just doing exercises, you know. I spent all summer doing that, studying that Teach Yourself English book, you know, just doing exercises, and I couldn't speak, you know. I was just, you know, entry-level student, so to speak, even though we had English from grade 5 in school, but most people never were able to learn it, because school is just like 2 hours a week, you know. It was silly. So when we show up for the exam, I remember, so this is summer of 79, and one of the guys who was there, helping to conduct this exam, he says, if possible, I know it might be difficult for you, but if possible, could you please speak English? Basically, let's say you need a pencil, don't say, можно мне карандаш? No, you have to say in English. I'm like, holy moly, like, will I be able to do it, you know? So that was the first time I probably used English as a real language, you know, to communicate, you know, because all these guys, they were fluent, you know. And I still remember all our teachers were amazing. They were fluent in English, they loved it, and we're talking middle of Ukraine, middle of the farming community with farms all around and fields. But these people, were just so dedicated, you know. And that's one of the reasons I learned to speak so well, because we had great teachers, you know. And so these guys started, you know, basically right from day one, even from the exam, they were teaching us to use the language the way it was intended, you know, don't just do the exercises in the textbook. And it was very difficult, you know, first time, and somehow I passed. And then they don't give you the results right away. I remember they said a week or something, or 2 weeks. And so every summer we would usually drive in my dad's Moskvich, my dad's car. We'd drive 1,000 kilometers to the place where he grew up, where his mother, you know, my grandmother lived, right? So that was always like a road trip during the summer. And so my parents said, hey, while we're waiting for your exam results, like, you want to go with us or you want to stay here? And I said, yeah, let's go. And so we drove to suburb of Moscow, you know, spent some time there, and then when we came back, the results were in, and turns out I got in. And even though my grades were not were lower than grades of some other students, but what helped me is that I was a guy, and at this point they wanted more men in schools, because mostly of course it was women. And so there was a lot of girls applying, you know, doing these exams, but and some of them of course got better grades, but because I was a guy, they gave me, you know, the thumbs up, kind of like, right? And so I get in, and some more successful female student got rejected. So, but that was how things were, you know. They wanted more men in schools. They wanted to attract more guys, because there was too many women. So I got in, and they give you this student certificate, and I think they paid us a scholarship of 40 rubles a month. I still lived with my parents, so my dad was not happy. And then I think when I was in year 2, I got married for some reason. I was like, I don't know, 19, 20 years old. And I met a girl she was also at our department, you know, English language, and she was like 1 year older. And I don't know, it was crazy. And we stayed together, I think, for like 3 years. Our parents helped us rent a house, or a couple of rooms in a house, and they were giving us some money to pay the rent, because we were some, you know, poor students. We never had any kids. She got pregnant, but it didn't happen. They had to end the pregnancy because she was very skinny. But anyway, that was my first experience with married life, very early in life. And so yeah, but the main focus here at this time was English, and I was obsessed with it, you know. Like, when I saw the teachers, you know, how good they were, and we had very small groups, you know, like each class was maybe like 10, 12 people. So, and it was English, like 5-6 hours a day. Like, it was, let's say, English spoken language, then it was English grammar, English phonetics, you know, like basically they taught us from basics, you know. We went over all sounds, you know, how to properly pronounce each sound, kind of like we started from scratch, you know. And there was kind of like immersion. We immersed ourselves in this language, and I was so happy. I loved it. And everywhere you go, there were signs, English is spoken here. So again, they encouraged all students to speak English as much as possible. You know, let's say you talk to your friend, hey, you know, where you want to go for lunch. So you don't speak Russian, you speak English. And again, that helped a lot. And that's how I ended up, you know, being fluent in English. And every summer, I remember every summer it was a tradition in all Russian colleges and universities. Students would be sent to a farm to help out farmers, like during the harvest, you know, like potatoes were popular, right? Potato, when they were harvesting potatoes, or they would send you to a farm with a, you know, big orchard. And I remember that a couple of other guys in my class, they were also very, like, most guys were actually very interested in English, but ladies, girls, they, you know, they didn't care. They just wanted to get a diploma and be a teacher. So they were not as focused on English as us guys. But I remember I had one guy, his name was Yuri, or George. He wanted people to call him George when we talked in English. And we were so obsessed with this. So I remember we were somewhere in the farm, and we are gathering apples, right? I'm in the middle of the tree, and he's on the ground, and we're in the middle of nowhere on the farm, and we talk English to each other. And there were girls nearby from our department, and they're like, "Oh my God, guys, come on, stop it! You know, we've had enough of this." So they just didn't understand it, but we were, you know, like, "Hey, George, you know, how do you like that apple?" So we were constantly practicing during these farm assistance times. And actually, yeah, it was usually they would send us there for like 2 or 3 weeks, I think, early fall, late summer. All students had to do this, and they still actually paid us. They paid us something, and the food was great. Usually they would put us up in a school, in a local school. You know, they would turn it into you know, they would put some beds in, right, and there would be a canteen or, you know, a lunch area. And they made this amazing, you know, village country style, you know, borscht and soup, you know, and the food was great. Like, I think I gained like probably 10 kilos each time by the time you go back to your town. Yeah, so this was like a camp. So we had to live there. We had to, then in the morning, a bus would come, take us to the field, and we work all day. Then there's a lunch break, and then we go back. You know, it was a real fun work. So, and then another I'm looking at my notes here. Another opportunity I had to practice English was in Soviet Union. It was kind of like optional, mandatory. You know, like you cannot say no, but all students had to act as a militia. You know, you would probably call it like that. In Russian, it was called druzhinnik. Basically, our police was called militia, like the policeman was militsioner, and actually then later they changed them to police, even in Russian, poliция. But what they wanted us to do, you know, we would show up at the local police station. Hey, we are students from, you know, Pedinstitute, pedagogical, you know, institute, and they would tell us which area where they want us to patrol, and they would give us these bands. It would say druzhinnik, like militia, and we were just, you know, a bunch of guys. I think, yeah, they didn't do it with 2 girls, but only guys. Guys, we would go basically, no weapons, nothing. We'd just walk around and, you know, down the street and up, you know, like, and it was good enough for young kids, right? In the fresh air, and we would just, if something happens, I don't remember if they give us any radios or something, but we were supposed to call. We can call the police station, right? If we see some crazy drunk or something like that. So we were just kind of like helpers to the police, you know. So, and they didn't pay us anything for this. I think it was like once a week, and also whenever we did this, it was only guys from my department, you know, English language department. So we always try to speak English when we walk like that, because girls were not there. Girls could not tell us to shut up. So, you know, so we would walk around, and sometimes I remember catching some strange glances from pedestrians, you know, because we're again in the middle of a agricultural, you know, agricultural area. And all these farmers around, and they look at us. We look like Russians or Ukrainians, and we speak in a language they don't understand. So they kind of look at you funny. But that's how obsessed I was. I focused on English so that I would practice everywhere. And also at this point, I went much further than was required. Two methods I used. I remember the book I read by a famous Hungarian translator or interpreter. Her first name was Kato, and her last name was Lomb, Kato Lomb, and she was a she could do, like, simultaneous translation, and she was fluent, I think, either 3 or 5 languages, and so she wrote a book how she achieved that. And she was saying that, of course, sometimes, let's say there's a language that she didn't use for a while, and then all of a sudden somebody calls her and says, hey, we need a translator, interpreter for that particular language. So she would have to brush it up. And she said the most effective exercise she would use was talking to herself. Let's say you're on a bus and you just, if there's no people, you can talk out loud. If there's people, you can just talk to yourself inside your head, just about anything, as long as it's in that language. And so when I was on the bus, because the college was about 10 minutes away by bus, and so I would be on the bus and I would just look at stuff, on the other side of the window, and I would talk to myself in English, hey, I like that car, like basically anything, as long as it's, a real speech. I was practicing all the time, talking to myself, and then if there's nobody around, I would talk out loud, like now. And the other thing I learned, the other very important method I used to master English was reading. I read about this, that basically you don't need to, many people don't realize that, of course, English language has like thousands of words, right? But mostly you need anywhere between 5 and 10,000 words. But these words have to be the most popular ones. Like there's dictionaries like that where they select the most popular words. So if you know 10,000 most popular words in English, you'll be fluent, Of course, you won't be able to talk about, I don't know, spacecraft launch or something like that, but a real life situation, you want to, go buy a piece of bread or hail a taxi or stuff like that, or get a job. 10,000 words is, more than enough. And so what's interesting is that this method, they were saying, try to read something with an interesting plot so that you can guess the meaning of words. So basically, don't use the dictionary, just try to guess the meaning of words from the context, and don't pay attention to details. Like they were saying, let's say if you read the story, and of course, I was reading like thrillers, whodunits, stuff like that, detective novels. And let's say they say, oh, a criminal is hiding behind a bush, and then there's a name for the bush, like the brand or whatever, right? And so you don't need to know that. As long as you understand that he was hiding behind the bush, you don't have to know what kind of bush it was, And so the more you read, by definition, most popular words will go through your head more often, right? And so, and it worked. Basically, I would go to, we had libraries, of course. You could borrow English language books, and then we had a couple of stores in town where I would go and I buy some, English language, novels and stuff like that. There was no Amazon, there was nothing like but I read a ton of books. I remember each day my goal was to go anywhere from 20 to 40 pages in English, So I always had a book on me. So that's how I learned, how I mastered the English. And so it was 5 years, and then I think third year they also added German, which everybody hated, but I got good at it. But of course now I forgot almost everything. But at this point I started thinking about the future, because the end of the studies was looming up ahead, and I realized that I didn't have a plan, like basically if I don't do anything, I will graduate as a teacher of English. And since I had no pool, I did not know anybody in town, chances were that I would be sent to a village school, country school, because that's where teachers were required. And so I tried to get into this trying to find some other options, but you know, nothing worked. And so after graduation, I got the diploma, teacher of English, and I got sent to a small town about 50 kilometers south or north of Kirovograd, you know, where I lived, right? And so I went there. This was 1984. So I was what, 22. Yeah, I was 22 years old, and I became a teacher of English and also a physical training teacher, because they didn't have one. So they asked me, do I want to be a PT instructor? I said, yeah, sure, why not? They got me housing. A local woman, her son was in the army, and I was approximately his age, and so they rented me a room. I think the school was paying for it. The food was amazing. This lady was, you know, cooking. I remember I was always asking her for вареники. Вареники с картошкой. Basically, it's like dumplings, but kind of like Russian style dumplings, but they look very similar to like Chinese dumplings. But inside was, you know, either potatoes and cheese, or meat. And her husband was like complaining, you know, like, oh man, dumplings again. And she said, well, Sergei asked me again. He likes them. So basically, she was cooking. She was so happy to cook for me, you know, that even her husband was kind of like, you know, let's stop this. And so yeah, so that was 1984. And yeah, I became a teacher. It was very boring. I did not like it. And so at the first opportunity, I volunteered to join the army, because it was basically obligatory. Unless you were a teacher in a country, like technically I didn't have to go. But if I was, let's say, a worker, or I went to like a 3-year technical school, you had to go to the army like regular guys would go for 2 years. If you had university education, you would go for 1 year. Oh no, 1.5, I think. Yeah, 1.5. Yeah, so 18 months. And so I volunteered, and of course the school principal was super upset, because this was like fall of 1984. And yeah, and I became a paratrooper. Paratrooper. I was supposed to be an interpreter. Like, they were supposed to send me to a special unit where you like eavesdrop on English language communications between, you know, NATO. I don't know. But I saw there was at the railroad station, when we were about to board the train, I saw guys there, and one of the sergeants wore this, you know, paratrooper uniform, like green beret, you know, like, holy moly, I want to be that, you know. And I went to him, I said, can you trade me? Can you talk to my lieutenant over there? Because they're sending us to this, you know, radio intercept kind of like school. And they didn't care, so he talked to my lieutenant. That lieutenant, okay, take him. And so all the guys from our pedagogical institute went with that radio communications kind of spy stuff. And I joined the paratrooper thing and did some parachute jumps. You know, it was mostly a waste of time, but more about that in the next episode. So we're gonna finish here. So we started in 1979 and we ended in 1984, when I basically quit my job as a teacher of English in a small country school and became a soldier. Thanks for watching.